right, so we are going to start to paint the poinsettia, and we actually are painting with alcohol inks. So I have crimson here and I have cranberry. I am using a paint palette here. You can use these for distress inks like I used in the watercolor video. You can also use them for alcohol inks. And I typically have different ones for different mediums. So I'm not using my distress ink one for working with alcohol inks. And I'm just going to paint each of the petals of the poinsettia carefully, trying not to get it on the gold embossing powder. Alcohol ink works on any non-porous surface, so if I get it on the embossing powder, it's going to color the embossing powder, which is something you can't totally avoid, but by avoiding the embossing powder a little bit, you'll get less on there. And you can take, I've got isopropyl alcohol in here, you can take some isopropyl alcohol and clean it off a little bit, but you're not going to be able to get it 100% clean. And then anytime you put your brush within that alcohol ink, it's just going to turn it your red color. So it's a little completely different from watercoloring with watercolor inks with dye-based inks. And to be honest, watercoloring or coloring with painting with alcohol inks is not my favorite technique. I typically will use alcohol inks with more mixed media, more background techniques. But one of the things with classes is you learn some of the things you love and you learn some of the things you don't necessarily like. So I always think it's important to try different techniques and learn what it is that you love doing and what it is that is not really your cup of tea. So just like I did with the distress ink watercoloring background, I do all over the entire surface of the petal. Then I do my darker color. And any places that I have ink that I want it to be a little bit lighter, I'm just going to take some isopropyl alcohol and I'm just going to clear it off a little bit. So that petal is done. And the inks blend with each other completely different than distress inks do. So you can't even really compare how the inks work to each other. They're completely different things. I'm going to take a little bit of the darker color and put it in here. I don't spend a lot of time fussing around with it. When your inks dry on the palette, and they will because they are alcohol based, they will start to evaporate and they will dry really quite quickly. Just take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol in one of the wells there and add it to the ink, and that will rehydrate it. Or you can get some more ink from your bottle, but you really don't need to. Just getting some isopropyl alcohol and rehydrating it really is just enough. And as the inks dry, you'll find that it does move and blend a little bit as well. So you don't need to keep fiddling with it till it's perfect. They will start to dry and they will blend while they're drying. And that's just what alcohol inks do. And that, I mean, watercolors do that as well. These tiny petals, I'm just gonna completely color them with the dark color of the alcohol ink. If I found it was too dark, what I can do is just take my brush, put it in some of the isopropyl alcohol, take some of the excess off, and you can lighten the color a little bit. You're never going to get it back to the same color as the cardstock was before we put alcohol inks on it. Even though there's a shiny surface to it, alcohol inks will soak into the porous paper underneath. So like I said, alcohol ink cardstock is a glossy cardstock, but it is porous. It's a clay-coated cardstock and it is porous, so the ink does soak into it. So you'll notice it soaked around the outside while we were painting. Sorry, I said that wrong. It soaked into the back of the cardstock when we were creating our background, not while we were painting. I'm gonna add a little bit here because I'm not getting much of that bright red color. There we go. And you definitely have to do this technique petal by petal. You don't go and do the entire thing and then go add the darker parts of the petal, because this ink just dries far too quickly. And if you waited if you did the entire thing and then went in with the dark alcohol ink, it would blend even more differently than it is now. If I want it to be really dark in an area, I can just tap my brush like this, and that's going to leave the ink in that area a little bit darker than the rest of the petal. And like I said before, I'm trying not to paint over the embossing powder. Some of it is going to seep up into there anyways, and that's fine. I'm not really too worried about it. You're still going to see little bits of the gold. There's not really a way to avoid it. The only thing you possibly could do, and I didn't do it for this class, is to use like a stamp positioner. And then when you're completely done painting, you could always go back and stamp it in exactly the same position and then emboss it again. But this is all part of the look for me, so I've left it exactly as it is. And if some of the embossing gets covered up, that's totally fine. One last petal here. And you'll notice that I did a little bit of gold around the edges of the embossing, or sorry, around the edges of our rectangle piece here. And the reason for that is to tie in some of the gold in the embossing here. We're going to do that in the next video. It's a way to frame it without having to get another piece of cardstock for a mat, and it's also going to bring out the gold embossing that we still have there. So it is completely painted. I'm just going to let it dry before we start doing the background part, and we will see you in the next video for that. Back again. Before we go to the next video, in order to clean your brush, put some isopropyl alcohol onto some paper towel and rub your brush against it, and just keep doing that until you don't have any color coming off of your brush. You could leave it on your brush if you wanted to just use that brush for alcohol ink, but it would be a shame to use that alcohol or that brush into a different color that you don't want red in, because the alcohol will always rehydrate it. So you want to keep cleaning your brush onto some paper towel until there's no color. That way you know next time you go into it, you have a clean brush to work with. We'll see you in the next video.